I'm Dave Brown, right along ringside. By golly, we're about ready to go with more big action.
Thank you very much, and welcome to Georgia Championship Wrestling. I'm Gordon Solie, your host, and we have quite an hour in store for us.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Championship Wrestling at ringside. This is Vince McMahon, along with wrestling's only living legend, Bruno Sammartino.
Welcome to this week's edition of Mid-South Wrestling Television. I'm your host, Boyd Pierce, another outstanding card.
Hey, guys, and welcome back to the Regional Rasslin Podcast, where we talk the territories. I am Ray Russell, and this week, very excited, going to start yet another new project here in the Regional Rasslin world, and I want to thank everybody out there for their patience, as we've been promoting this for several months now, but we finally got our ducks in a row, everything together. The time is aligned properly, and it's time to get going here with Championship Wrestling from Florida, circa 1980. That's right, we're going way back in time to the Florida territory. Eddie Graham, Dusty Rhodes, the Mac and Dream, Bugsy McGraw, the Raging Bull, Manny Fernandez, Mike Graham, Steve Kern, Stanley Lane, and Bryan St. John, Leroy Brown, and all points in between. And this is going to be a really fun adventure for me because several super fans, historians, even a certain someone from the Florida office once upon a time reached out to me to be involved in this very exciting project. I've been waiting a while to get into the territory of Florida, and I wanted to do it justice and do it right when we got there. So we're going to talk about a lot of that as we go along. Some of the people who have already reached out, gave me some information, worked with me to get me prepared. And I'm so excited for episode number 1 in the project to bring on a true Florida wrestling super fan. He can rattle things off like you wouldn't believe. And I'm looking forward to getting his insight and his memories into this era of Florida 1980. But in order to do that, we got to set the stage first. And we're going to do that this week here as we bring on, for the very first time on Regional Rasslin, though not a stranger to WrestleCopia. You may have heard him in the past on the Other Ship podcast. But now he joins the Regional Rasslin ranks. And if you've ever heard me or Jamie Ward affectionately say, "Damn it, Harold," this is the man we're referencing. He is the one and only. Please welcome Mr. Harold Strassler. Welcome for the very first time to Regional Rasslin.
Ray, it is an absolute honor. I've been looking forward to doing this for quite a while. I know you and I have spoken, and we had some things get in the way, but I am truly honored and excited to be here. And yeah, we'll talk about the Masked Superfly when we get to 1980, and I'm probably the only one who really did appreciate him.
Interesting. Yes, I remember a Masked Superfly, and I'm reading things and such, so I'm looking forward to that. We've got a lot to get into here when we get to 1980, but for anybody who's been a longtime fan or even a new listener, simply because we're covering Florida, one thing we like to do here on Regional Rasslin, I always hate to hit the ground running. Because as a kid, sometimes you would get an old tape and they would reference a few, but they wouldn't elaborate. And but explain it to me, Gorilla. Explain it to me, JR or Tony Schiavone. And so that's what this episode's all about. It's kind of explaining what we're going to see in 1980 by talking about what's happening here in 1979. But Harold, before we do any of that, let's go back to your initial fandom here and just some of the names, because we're going to do more than just an overview here of what was happening, but just some of the names that really reached out to you immediately, that drew you back week after week.
So the first thing, I have to paint the picture a little bit about me. I was born in Boston. I lived in WWF country, but never watched wrestling. And then in 1976, my parents, who never did anything spontaneous in their lives, got the bright idea to move to sunny South Florida. And anybody who lived in Palm Beach County, 76, there wasn't a lot in Florida. I know people who have been to Florida now can't envision it, but it was, you had the Miami Dolphins. You did have spring training, which I am extremely forever grateful for, but you had the Dolphins. You had Highlight, which, because there was betting as a kid, you couldn't go to. And the other thing, as incredible as it may seem now, you had Championship Wrestling from Florida. And if you were in Florida at that time, I want to start off by saying how magical and how all these years later, I still hold it near and dear to my heart. So I am flipping channels one day. It had to have been on a Saturday. And I don't remember in all honesty, I may have come across Georgia Championship Wrestling first, but when I compare the two, obviously they both had Gordon Soley. There was some crossover, but Championship Wrestling from Florida, for whatever reason, just drew me in. Maybe it was the set. Obviously, Eddie Graham, for all his history, and I'm sure we'll get into that, knew how to book angles, knew how to get people over, and we'll talk about that, especially when we talk about my experiences watching a very young 19-year-old Barry Windham rise up.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that was key in Championship Wrestling, and this will come out a lot, is the fact of top to bottom of the card, everybody could work. And you will find that when I tell stories and talk about different talent, I have a great reverence for guys even at the bottom of the card because they were all guys who could work. This wasn't, and I'll probably take some criticism, but forgive me, anybody who was a WWF fan and watching Frankie Williams get beaten up every week on a Saturday, and maybe he would throw what would be in other territories a forearm, but was really a punch, which didn't make sense in the way we were brought up in wrestling. But and I know he won the odd match in the house shows, but guys, you didn't have too many squashes unless it was to get a monster heel over. So anyway, what got me really into it was the whole presentation. And years later, when I started going to the fan fests, and I shout out to my friend Barry Rose for those, and we did go by the building it was filmed, you realize how small it was. So it was pretty magical that on TV you would see this haven of fantastic action. And the point of it was to draw you in and make you want to go to the arena. So it was just the whole presentation. The heels seemed larger than life. The baby faces seemed like the guy next door, and they knew how to get their points across. And so I was never a boxing guy, but to watch the different styles, it was just absolutely amazing. So I started maybe a little bit in 78. I was born in 68, so I wasn't even 10. And really 79 was when I started kind of looking for it on TV.
Off to the races here by the end of the 1970s. Little Harold Strassler becoming a huge wrestling fan. I'd be a few more years before I caught on to the rock and wrestling era for me is what I had in my neck of the woods. But you go back and you talk about the building and the presentation and Gordon Soley, professional, the dean who knew he was having some cocktails in between, but Gordon was a hell of an announcer. He knew how to get everything over. He's amazing. I'm so thankful that me and Jamie have been able to cover so much of Gordon. And I mean, he put so much over in Georgia while he was working Florida as well. And so for Gordon to be able to do that there, that helps. But then a lot of the talent, majority of the talent back then knew how to get themselves over. And if they didn't, Eddie Graham was good at figuring out how to get them over. Eddie Graham was the masterpiece of bookers, as far as I'm concerned, when you hear of all the guys he taught how to book and the finishes he came up with and the angles and everything had to make sense. You were talking about forearms and punches, and it was a sport to Eddie Graham when he was doing the press. It was kind of Cowboy, and Cowboy got it from Eddie. This is a sport. We're treating this as a competition. And there's certain rules that, because my grandfather was not a wrestling fan, and every time he walked in the room, he would pick it apart. Well, why is he doing that? And why is it? He was thinking like a normal non-wrestling fan would be thinking when they're trying to sway you away from being the wrestling fan. And so guys like Eddie Graham and Bill Watts made it much harder for the non-fan to point out the little flaws in the logic sometimes.
Yes. But it also made it that, and I'm sure we'll talk about plenty of turns, whether it was heel or face, that you really got into it.
Yeah. Like in the Memphis territory, guys are flip-flopping back and forth, face to heel, heel to face, and there's not really a reason to rhyme sometimes. But like you said, in Florida, a lot of it made sense, and it got so much heat, in the TV, at the house shows, whatever the case may be, whatever the story we were telling. And we're going to see that very early on, and I don't want to spoil a whole lot, so I'm not going to name drop who's going to be turning or what's going to be happening here when we get into 1980. But there's some really interesting, fun storylines ahead. But before we get into any of that, I wanted to jump back with you here into the fall of 1979 and talk about some of the talent, some of the storylines, some of the guys, and we're going to see some get elevated here. And like any territory, eventually some guys go away to make room for new talent to come in. And we'll talk about a lot of different things that happened here near the end of 1979. Now, you gave me a short list of things that you definitely wanted to hit on here. And so we're going to follow that format first. And I want to talk to you first about, this is fun, some of the storyline between Jimmy Garvin with Joe LeDuc and, of course, Carl Cox.
So this is more of a anecdotal for me. I didn't actually see it, but I don't think you can talk about 79 without at least mentioning it. And the story was that, as you know, Joe LeDuc was a heel in Memphis, and Sonny King was in Memphis. And you can find the video on YouTube or wherever where he tries to throw Lawler over the table, and he doesn't actually make it. I think Lawler took the blame for that. So he didn't make it all the way over the table. And so apparently Jimmy Garvin, who was getting a push in Florida, and I did see a lot of his push, but I just didn't see the beginning of it. And this is on Barry Rose's and others' high end of Holy Grail that no one has seen. But apparently Garvin exposed him on TV, and LeDuc came out, put him in a bear hug, and drew blood. And that started a vicious, vicious feud. By the time I was watching, LeDuc was already a heel. LeDuc was a monster in terms of the one-arm backbreaker, and he was a guy who beat up anybody. But it was more anecdotal in wanting to bring that in because I didn't actually see that. Mm-hmm. But I don't know how you talk about Championship Wrestling Florida and at least kicking off part of 79 without talking about that. And they went round and round, and obviously Garvin was at some point able to overcome it. It's funny because if you look at Garvin, maybe he was 220. He wasn't very big. I met him at Fest, which was an absolute honor. Great guy. Wanted to get out of wrestling at 40 and did, became a pilot, still married to his wife. They have a couple of houses, grandkids. Very happy in life. Great to see it. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to mention that. I would jump into one I did see, which was at that time Garvin was using the Brain Buster. I never bought into Garvin's Brain Buster. I don't know why. Just never felt, even when he was a heel later on, just didn't do it for me. But he was being trained by Killer Carl Cox. Now, if you knew Killer Carl Cox, he was a vicious heel, but he had taken Garvin under his wing, which made him a face. And, of course, that went on for a while until the cracks appeared, and Cox was in Florida for about half the year. He turns heel. Garvin eventually vanquishes him, and he leaves, maybe to go back to Mid-South or Georgia. One of those two. But Garvin had a pretty impressive run through most of 79 in Florida. And we'll talk about maybe he won the, I think it was the Southern belt at some point, or it was the Florida belt. I'd have to look. But he was a champion in Florida. And back then he was drop kicking. I used to watch him drop kick. He was pretty maneuverable. Not the Jimmy Jam you saw with Michael Hayes toward the end of his career.
That was not his fault. I'm just saying.
That was good. I like that. but very much over as a face.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to see Jimmy come through a lot of the territories. Unfortunately, outside of the little bit of footage that exists of Jimmy during this time frame, not a lot of his run here. This run here as babyface Jim Garvin in the Florida territory. He's going to wind up working for Bill Watts shortly after this, and the list goes on and on. His run for Vern Gagne in the mid '80s and Crockett.
Well, I remember when I met him, I asked him I was curious. He showed up in Georgia in '81, and I said to him, "Show up in Georgia. Maybe he had a couple of matches with Buzz Sawyer. Why nothing more? You were winning on TV." He said, "I'll never forget this." He looked at me and said, "There was nothing special about me." I said, "Wow. They put belts on you in Florida." He goes, "In Georgia, there was nothing special." Okay. So go figure.
Very interesting that, a humble guy and kind of counteracts his future gimmick anyway. But no, Jimmy Garvin was a big deal right here. And I wanted to get that Carl Cox mention out there as well, because people that listen to a lot of the regional wrestling programs just enjoy the history lessons. And there's always reference. Even Bill Watts in the Mid-South will reference Jimmy Garvin's time underneath the learning tree of Carl Cox, who taught him, quote unquote, the Brainbuster maneuver. And I don't know that Jimmy ever really perfected that move. I think that, to me, that's why I didn't buy into it. I wasn't really a big fan of Jimmy's Brainbuster, but he used it for quite a while. So at least a little homage to the Killer.
He did.
I guess.
And then toward the end of his run, when he was Southern champion, he started using the spinning toe hold. That was the one thing that was always fascinating to me. Sometimes guys' finishes would change, and with no explanation. And when we get the Bugsy McGraw, I'm sure I'll throw that one out there, because I asked him about that one time. But yeah, the other thing that was pretty cool was a guy like Garvin. They would also win with, say, depending on what you want to call it, but when they get the abdominal stretch and do a lateral roll and cradle him up, he would win with that. I mean, so it's very different now, where this is a shot, definitely a WWE, where you could do 3 pile drivers to somebody, but if it's not your finish isn't the pile driver, he's kicking out no matter what. Never made sense to me, and still does.
Your only finisher is your finisher. It would appear.
So if you don't hit that, you could throw him off the second story of the house, but if your finisher isn't that, he's kicking out something.
Yeah. Well, in the summer of 1979, something huge happens here, especially for the Florida fans. A guy by the name of the Mac and Dream, baby, Dusty Rhodes, in public, if you will. He comes through and, he wins the NWA World Heavyweight Championship for the very first time. Big Dusty doesn't hold it very long, but it's a huge deal. And I have to imagine, especially for the Florida fans who've known Dusty for so long, from heel to babyface, the long run of Americana throughout the 1970s, and at the end of the decade, the Dream brings it home for the fans. He's not, again, for a cup of coffee, but he is the champion, the NWA World Champion. Do you remember that happening?
Yes,
Were you watching during that little period of time?
So what was fascinating, as a kid, I was a big Dusty fan. When I started watching wrestling, it's funny how this went. I was a very big, babyface guy. But that didn't last as long as maybe you would think, because somehow along the lines, and we'll talk later, I think what did it for me, a couple of mask guys, or 3 of them, but I turned into liking the heels more. But Dusty was always great in retrospect, chasing something. And it's one of those things where sometimes they say wanting it is better than having it, or however you want to say it. Dusty was definitely better when he was chasing. And I remember when he beat Harley Race, it was a very big deal for me as a fan.
Right.
What kind of, I don't want to say ruined it, but really detracted. He lost the thing about 5 days later. I'm going off memory, but it was real quick.
That's about right.
And he lost it on a DQ, for God's sakes. So the whole NWA over the top rope was a DQ, right? You didn't throw your opponent off the top rope.
Right.
Over the top rope. You didn't jump. You weren't supposed to jump off the top, these were things that make sense in the long run, because you could keep the heat on the heel. The face wins the match, but it doesn't win the belt. Jumping off the top could be a problem because, again, you could kill somebody if you did it for real, although I'm sure doing a knee drop onto somebody's head from the second turnbuckle wouldn't feel good either. But, the point of the matter is the fact that Race, time after time, kept the belt by, and this is no disrespect to Harley Race, I put Harley Race on the Mount Rushmore for me. I can tell you, amazing. But the fact that he would be able to keep his belt sometimes when needed by a DQ, but Rhodes lost it that way, it just didn't make sense to me. And so watching that as a fan, it's like, wait a minute, what? Well, it was a special. He waved at the... I never, that kind of stuff, even as a kid, didn't like it.
Well, you talk about the money's in the chase, and most territories believe that the money was in the chase, which is why we would see the heels champion. Yep. Now, that's not how Vince McMahon Sr., that's not how he operated, but it worked in the New York territory. It worked there, and it might have worked in certain markets. Vern was champion for long periods of time, but Bockwinkel was also a champion for a good stretch of time as well.
Vern looked like he was 80 years old, and if we talk about Buddy Rogers for 5 minutes, we'll talk about that too. I don't know. I don't want to be disrespectful. Anybody who got in the ring, even for 5 minutes, is more than I ever did, so there's respect.
I think Buddy Rogers' name's going to come up again here at some point, so we'll definitely get to Buddy Rogers.
He's in 79,
but it's an excellent point that the money's in the chase. Dusty realized that. I think Dusty was 3-time world champion. He couldn't have held the belt more than 100 days total, and 90 of those was like in one run, 90 days, and then I think this time it's 5 days, and the last time's like 2 weeks. So Dusty knew. I didn't understand as a kid. I'm like, why does this guy win the title? And every time he gets it, it's like it's gone the next day. But it makes sense. He understands that. And Dusty's got his hand in the booking here all throughout the early 1980s until he jumps to Crockett and takes half the roster with him. But we're not going to talk about that right now, B-Biff. We're going to move on and talk about some of the other talent here I'm looking at. You got King Curtis Ayakea on the list. Tell me a little bit about the King, my son.
So the King, I wish I had seen him when he was younger and in better shape. The King I saw in 79, he was using the spike before Don Muraco. He was using a little off the second rope. I don't even know how the heck he could get on the second rope, but he wouldn't come down with a splash. But he was not very mobile at the end. It was hard to watch. Even as a kid, you kind of, at least I I wasn't wise to the business at all. And I wanted to believe. I'm like Fox Mulder in the X-Files. I want to believe, right? So, but it was watching him. I'm like, it's got to hurt this guy maneuvering, and he wasn't very maneuverable at that point. He still looked scary. He had shaved his head. He had a bald head, which he didn't have before. Again, not a guy that I always thought of. Oh my God! If I walked in, the guy was in the garage and he wants me. He's going to do something if he got a hold of me. Yeah, but he was not very mobile. He was in some tag teams and different things. He was with Killer Khan, who was in and out. Still looked like a monster, just not very maneuverable. And this was his last run. Quite honestly, I think he was Florida champ, and they took the belt off of him. And toward the end, they were just trying to be respectful to a guy who had made a bunch of money and had a great career. So that was how he went out. He was Florida champ for a little bit of time in 79.
They would attempt, and they being multiple promoters would attempt to try to get some use out of King Curtis here in the early 1980s. But as you said, his last real run would be here in Florida, in the ring, I mean. And it shows, it's hard to watch King Curtis. He'll come through the WWF as a manager in 1986 going into 1987. And if you just watch, it's hard to watch him there. He's not there long before you realize.
What was his name in WWF? It was
The Wizard.
Thank you. Wizard. Couldn't remember it. Yeah.
And he would channel the Grand Wizard. He would talk to the Grand Wizard in the sky, the heavens above. But it was hard to watch him because he couldn't get in the ring. So they had Kim Chi with Kamala get in the ring. And King Curtis because of his knees, he couldn't just get in and out of the ring. So he would just stand outside and shout. And there's actually there's a match from Maple Leaf Garden. And I know it's kind of sad to say, but they had the ramp. And so once he got up the steps to the ramp, he could get in the ring because he didn't have to climb into the ring. And so it was the only time I got to see him kind of bump for Hogan a little bit because he could make it. And unfortunately, his run there wasn't very long, but they did try to throw him a bone. And later on, he would get the WCW under Kevin. Kevin would book him in that cartoony match. And he got to sit on a throne and get paid for it. So, it's like Roman Gomez. Roman Gomez told me when I used to say, I can't believe the sheep herders were turned into the bushwhackers. And Roman kind of theorized that, you know what, though? They earned that. As shitty as it was for us wrestling fans. Those guys had bumped and carved up their head for 20 years. Let them go get paid and act a fool.
And when we get to 81, I will tell you my Kiwi. They went by Kiwis here.
Yes.
Before they were and I will tell you all about it. And it was an honor to be able to tell the story I told to Luke Williams when I met him.
Yeah, Luke's great. I got to see him at the Fan Fest. I was down there for Barry and Nick Massey put together the first one, the first GrappleCon, and
the one in Orlando.
Yeah, Luke Williams of the Kiwis, the sheep herders. But so many names come through here shortly before 1980, and I don't know that they're here on the way out of the year, but there's a lot of Japanese talent. There's always been a lot of Japanese talent. That goes way back to Hiro Matsuda and Duke Kiyomuka doing the part and all these guys. But some of the talent of this time were the guys of the modern day times, but also a little bit of the old guard. Mr. Hito comes through here. Sakurada, who we'll talk about, I'm sure. We're going to find out that he'll change names and pivot later on. And Mr. Saito. And Saito's very notorious for being Mr. Torture, man. He wasn't just the guy that got in trouble with Ken Patera. He was the real deal. He was a tank, and he could move.
So Saito was another guy who, for whatever reason, even though he was dastardly and he was a heel, I liked him. He was a guy I enjoyed watching even back then. Don't ask me what it was, but I was just always impressed by how good he was in the ring. So even as a kid, and I went, gee, this guy's dastardly and this and that, he's one guy who I wish I could have met. There's a few of those I wish I could have met. He would have been in the short list because I'm always grateful for the ones, and I'm sure I'll bring some of that into as we talk. But the guy was just amazing with the versatility he had. And what do I mean by that? So yeah, he could win. He used a sleeper. He would use that. He had a vicious belly to back suplex, depending on what you want to call it.
Saito suplex. It's named.
Oh my God! And this is before he did the version of the scorpion death, whatever you want to call it, which was the inverted Boston Crab. But he'd also use Russian leg sweep and chops, and just what an amazing machine in the ring. I remember when he went to WWF and he was teamed with Fuji, and they said, Saito's a machine. Saito legitimately could have killed Fuji, for God's sakes, among others. But he was just utmost respect. Sato became the great Kabuki.
Okay, so Takachiyo was Kabuki, and he's Sato here. Interesting. Okay, I did not know that.
What's also amazing, I had seen an interview, he spoke pretty good English. So I was surprised. Saito had a thick accent, but Sato, who never spoke on TV, I had seen him in Central States or something just before I knew, and he spoke pretty good English. And he back then could do the finger thing, which I don't know how the heck was Kabuki, where he almost like double joint the fingers. But you didn't see, there wasn't a lot where when he was in Florida where you'd go, that's Kabuki. What do I mean by that? In Florida, the team would wrestle. So there was no mist, obviously, but he would do suplexes and neck breakers and different things that he totally did not do as Kabuki.
Right.
Go figure.
I just think back because we've covered it in my Japanese history podcast, and go back to Takachiyo. He was one of the last guys standing in the JWA, Ricky Dozan's old promotion. Ricky had passed at 63. And so by the end, when Inoki's got a promotion and Baba's got a promotion, and the JW is trying to stay relevant, who's left? Who didn't defect yet? And Takachiyo just winds up getting that nod just de facto near the top of the card for a little bit there. But he'll leave, obviously, and he'll spend a lot of time in the States now that he was that good at English right out of the gate. That's news to me. I didn't realize that.
I was impressed.
Well, he's got bigger days ahead, but I did not realize. Okay,
and they were managed by Tiger Hattori or Masao Hattori, whatever he's going by. He was there more, I think, because they also, one of the names that wasn't on my list, but I'll throw in, Tenryu shows up as kind of the third wheel. He never gets a push, but that was their way of acclimating him to the American style of wrestling. Tenryu obviously goes back to Japan and becomes very popular, but Tenryu is there both as Tenryu, and a few times I think he's under a mask as Rising Sun or something like that. Tenryu was a guy who, when they would do the six-mans, would take the heat, or if they wanted to have Hattori manage the dastardly guy from Japan who's going to collect the bounty and would lose, it would be a Tenryu. So that's what they would do. I don't know. Hattori seems like a really good guy, and I think he went to University of Tampa. He was bilingual at least, if not more. But as a heel manager, I don't know. He didn't strike fear into me the way others did. But that was me.
So I got another name here on the list, and he was kind of an imposing figure to me in the clips that I got to see from the magazines and trading tapes in the 1990s. Sonny King, who everything I had ever been taught online is that he was the drizzling shits in the ring, as they like to. He was one of the worst workers in the ring. They say, that's what they say. Sonny, I know him as a manager sucking on the lollipop. I know him as one of the, I don't want to say replacements for the dog, but one of the guys who comes through and fills the dog's void for Bill Watts there for a little bit after JYD pivots to New York. But Sonny King here, tell me a little bit about Sonny King and what he was doing in the Florida territory around this time.
So what's interesting in 79, at one point Sonny King shows up and he's doing battle with Ox Baker. Ox Baker was a vicious heel. And Baker, for those of you who saw him later on, wasn't the most mobile guy. He used a hard punch, but he was the heel. And King showed up as almost like a boxer throwing a bolo punch from underneath. I never really cared for that. And they did a boxing versus wrestling angle. And on TV, King knocked out Baker. I saw the match, didn't really care for it. I was not a big Sonny King fan. Then Sonny King morphs into a heel manager. And he's managing LeDuc. He's got a guy named Mr. Uganda who turns out to be Cyclone Negro under a mask, who had a very long career. He attacks Dusty Rhodes on TV using these weird headbutts. I don't remember him doing the lollipop thing back then, which was like the Kojak thing. It was a take on Kojak. But I never really watched Sonny King and went, oh my God, this guy is going to rule Florida. Right? I just didn't. He didn't strike me as a Gary Hart or a Sir Oliver Humperdink or a J.J. Dillon. Never really did it for me, quite honestly. In the ring, but didn't do a lot of wrestling in Florida. Did the boxer wrestler thing, maybe did a few matches, but I never really got Sonny King.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, Sonny King and Ox Baker together is just a scary thought. So that's that's one duo that I'm glad I didn't have to.
Yeah, I like Baker more because of his history. He got propped up in the magazines as a nasty heel. And in real life, I heard he was a real nice guy. He wasn't very mobile. And I think that people forget the bumps and what it does to the knees and the backs and everything else. And there's only so much you can do.
I remember Bob Roop telling a story on his show that I had not realized, because Ox Baker always gets it bad from everybody as far as his in-ring work goes, how terrible of a worker he was. But Bob Roop told the story, and I don't know what year this would have been, but working with Ox Baker, he said his knees were so terrible that you had to try to bump him by the ropes because he needed the ropes to even stand up. He couldn't stand up on his own. And so if Ox took a bump in the middle of the ring, he would literally have to roll all the way to the ropes in order to get back up. And so you have a new appreciation for Ox Baker at that point, realizing this guy's still in here trying to get it done, even though his legs are telling him no. Ox Baker's still trying to, I'm certainly make a couple bucks too, but he's also, he's got some heart to go out there and even take the bumps. Because a guy his size and his look, he doesn't really need to take a whole lot of bumps. I always looked at him like, as a kid my age, when he would come through for Vern and just randomly do a couple weeks as a manager or something, I was scared to death of the guy. Not only was he huge, but he looked like the devil with those horn eyebrows and things like that. He had a hell of a look.
Oh, yeah. Well, he also came through with a stretcher, and he was going to carry everybody out, and the heart punch was scary. And you watched it, and you're going, "Oh my God, he's punching the guy in the heart. The guy's going to drop dead in the ring." So he had, and what I didn't see it before '79. He had other runs which were probably even more impressive. By '79, he wasn't very mobile.
Right. Well, they tell that story of Vince Sr. bringing Ox in 1980 to be an opponent for Backlund, and after a set of tapings, they just send him on his way. But I saw a couple guys come through there that could have easily also been, ousted that quickly. But no, you're right.
Well, the one thing I'll say about Ox Baker, which was fascinating to me, was because Stasiak had used a heart punch, and supposedly he couldn't beat anybody with it toward the end, and guys they wouldn't let him use the heart punch. So he had to use that little elbow off the first rope, and I had seen replays of it where it was hard for him to get up. I think, being very candid with Ox, do I think that he could have had a little bit more of a run? I am of the camp that has nothing but respect for Bob Backlund. Mm-hmm. I think that he takes a bit of a hit. I think that the guy was legitimately a fitness fanatic, and he was tough, and I appreciated his work. So that's, I know we're talking Florida, but, as a wrestling fan, I think that they could have done, it wouldn't have been a 3-part or 4-part series, but I think it was a little harsh. That's just my take on it.
I think you could have got a one-off, at least in Philly and Boston, even if not in New York.
Hey, you know what? I'm gonna, if I say something about a guy who is in Florida, maybe I'll take a little bit of a heat, and you can determine if you want to leave it in. Ivan Putski is a perfect example. He came to Florida, and he was a face, and let's just say the Florida fans didn't buy it. Yeah, and he was quickly, I won't use the word because it's disrespectful, but he was on the losing end and sent packing by Ivan Koloff, which was not the original plan, but it was because he couldn't get over with fans. I never understood, at least in my humble opinion, that's what I'll say. I know Ivan was over in the Northeast, but as a guy who grew up where I did, I just never got the 4 moves. That's me.
The 4 moves of doom?
The headlock, the punching in the headlock, sometimes the double arms on the shoulder while he's on his back, the Polish hammer.
Of course,
maybe a chin lock. Chin lock. Well, that's about it, right?
I can't really argue that, but he could sing too. He was a hell of a singer. Don't forget that, Harold.
God. Melody of Love? No, thank you.
My melody of love. Well, no, okay. Well,
no.
Relive the glory days of Memphis wrestling with the Retro Wrestling Review USWA podcast. Each week, we go back in time to review USWA Championship Wrestling from the 1990s, episode by episode. Join us for watch-alongs, behind-the-scenes stories, and exclusive interviews with people who were there and lived it. Whether you grew up watching it or you're discovering it for the first time, this podcast is your ringside seat to Memphis wrestling history. It's all a part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Listen now at USWApodcast.com.
Hey guys, Ray Russell here. Lots of new stuff happening here at WrestleCopia, and I want to update you on everything going on with the brand right now. First and simple, if you haven't checked out our website at WrestleCopia.com, it's a great way to keep up with the latest episodes of all of your favorite Copia programming, from the Wrestling Memory Grenade to Regional Rasslin with the Territory Talk, the Wrestling Stoop with the legendary Bob Roop, Professor Dan Ginnity and the Pro Wrestling Academy, and all the other great podcasts from Gene Jackson, Bob Smith, Dave Dynasty, and the boys from the Other Ship. And of course, all of those programs also available at your favorite podcast streaming platforms. And if you want to stay up to date with everything going on in the Copia world, all the latest news, random thoughts, fun videos, pictures, and more, make sure to join the more than 33,000 followers over at Facebook.com/WrestlingGrenade. Don't be left out. Please also follow us at the former Twitter, now X, at Wrestling Grenade, and subscribe to YouTube.com/Wrestling Grenade. Would also greatly appreciate you leaving us a 5-star review at your favorite podcast apps, guys, because every positive review makes our podcasts more visible in the algorithms, if you will, which allows us to continue to grow. Now, for those who have been asking about merchandise, WrestleCopia merch, you can find plenty of designs for our t-shirts, hats, magnets, stickers, coffee mugs, and more over at the TeePublic store. That is tpublic.com/user/WrestleCopia. And last but definitely not least, it's what keeps the entire machine going. I'm talking about patreon.com/WrestleCopia. Now with 3 major tiers and tons of Patreon exclusive next level content for our supporters. Remember guys, no subscription, cancel any time, but I think you'll like the content that we're offering there for any budget you may have. And you can sign up right now, patreon.com/WrestleCopia. We appreciate your support in helping us pay the bills to keep the WrestleCopia Podcast Network running and enabling us to continue to bring you all the quality programming that we offer.
Hey, it's Bob Smith, and guess what? The Outdated Wrestling Hour is now part of the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. But hey, no fear, you're still going to hear the unique guests, comedy, music, authors, journalists, funny people. Who knows who's going to end up on the Outdated Wrestling Hour? Remember, it's all new and all old. So check it out in the WrestleCopia Podcast Network and wherever you get your podcasts. Listen if you know what's good for you.
There's a few other names we should touch on.
Oh, we are definitely going to touch on it. Here's one sticking out to me right now. He comes in, and at one point, I want you to explain to everybody how we get to this gimmick here of the Magnificent M. Things that make you go,
One of the, and I saw this live, and I did not know who he was. There's a couple of those that'll come out later on, but Don Muraco, who to me was one of the most amazing workers. Talk about a guy who was just so versatile in the ring. Great on the mic. The Asiatic spike. Think about it. Thumb in the throat being held down. Pretty ingenious. Again, borrowed from the King, Curtis, but this guy with a mask shows up, the Magnificent M. And he's on TV. I think he had only had one prior match. He wasn't around long as the Magnificent M. If I remember correctly, it was the week before, and he'd come out and real quick beat somebody with the spike. The following week, and I'm watching this, he takes on Big Bill Dromo, who's pretty sizable, beats him. He does an interview before, and he's saying about wanting Steve Kern, and he beats Dromo, kicks him out of the ring. Kern shows up. He sucker punches Kern. They end up on the floor. And then there's a bunch of them. I think it's Kern who unmasks him, but I think Ray Candy was there before his fall from grace, which we can talk about. Jack Briscoe, maybe Jerry. There are about 4 of them. Gets unmasked. The guy's completely bald.
Right.
Now, if you've ever seen Don Muraco, you know he's got a good set of hair, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he gets unmasked, and he goes to Gordon Soley, and he has one of the all-time great interviews, and you can find this on YouTube, but I watched it, and he's basically talking about how he got tired of being called the Briscoe, because in Florida before, which I didn't know this, he was a very scientific wrestler. He'd reversed the figure 4. He was almost like a protege to Jack Briscoe. This was breaking him out as a heel. Very ingenious. And he said, everybody in my brain is burned, and something you would never get away with saying nowadays. But he said it, and you could do things back then. Maybe he goes, it's just like a lynching. One man's got the rope, but everybody involved is guilty or something like that. I mean, you got to know this is a territory that would push it. And he had a very, very, very impressive run, because then he went by Magnificent Muraco, and he had shaved his head before the taping, and obviously it grew back, but he was vicious, and he will when we get to 1980, we talk about Barry Windham, he will get a lot of credit for that angle. But if you watched him week after week, he was scary as a heel. You thought he could kill anybody at a moment's notice.
He had those eyes, man. He had a way of making you just kind of believe.
He did.
And it was going into the 1980s, Harold, so he probably was in another world at times. But we'll just leave that there.
But he also was so good in the ring. Everything he did with such excellence. And what's funny, though, is if you watch the first few weeks where after he's unmasked and he's wrestling as Don Muraco or Magnificent Muraco as a recently turned unmasked heel, he still didn't have the tape on the thumb. That came later.
Yeah, Muraco was the guy to me that even got something out of 1980s Pedro Morales. And I apologize to Pedro fans out there, but he was, he didn't do a whole lot for me in the 1980s. Now, going back and watching early Pedro, a little bit of the early stuff, the WWF or in Japan, he was more mobile then, but by the 1980s, Pedro really wasn't getting it done anymore. But, Muraco brought something out of Pedro, and they had some amazing, I won't call them wrestling matches, fights. They had some amazing fights in the early 80s.
They did. But to your point, again, Pedro had been through Florida. He was a tag team champion, but it's funny, when I really saw him in WWF from the magazines, I was not blown away. No disrespect, just wasn't my style. I thought Muraco was, again, it was a pleasure watching him, and he made you believe.
Was Muraco one of those heels that you latched onto, or was he too scary of a being to really? Okay.
No, he was, because what I liked about Muraco was it wasn't always the thumb to the throat or the Asiatic spike. He could use a figure four. I saw him use power slams. He would jump off the second rope. There was some versatility to it. And I liked that. I always understood this is the guy's number one way to put somebody away. But if he couldn't do it, there were other ways. And I never bought into, again, what I said earlier, I can only beat you with one way. Doesn't matter what I do, right? Yeah. If my finisher is a figure four and I do a knee drop off the top onto your throat, I can't beat you? Really? Just never bought that. So,
well, that's fair. That's fair. Let's. I'm looking forward to talking all about Don Muraco as we continue on. He's in Georgia right now at 82 with me and Jamie, so I'm having a blast watching him there. And Roddy Piper should be coming here pretty soon. He's going to attack Gordon Soley. How dare he? His hands on the Dean there, but it's going to be fun when we get there. But right now we're going to talk about Don Muraco when we get into 1980, but there's some other names I wanted to touch on here. So there was a wrestler in this territory. He'd actually already worked for the WWF by this point, and there's a little bit of footage of him out there during that period in a tag team. And I was really impressed by his work in the WWF. You talked about the kick and punch territory, but I really likened that team of the Yukon Lumberjacks. If you watch them early, before they get the belts anyway, I liken them to Demolition. It was smash mouth, kick and punch, beat the crap out of the guy. Every move was believable. They moved like machines. And Scott Irwin, who was here in Florida in 79 as Thor the Viking, and he's going to lose a match here to Steve Kern in the fall and reappear mysteriously under a mask. We'll talk about that here too. But tell me a little bit about your memories of Scott Irwin, Thor the Viking, the maneuver over to Super D. Did you realize it was Scott? Tell me all about Scott Irwin.
No. So I want to start by saying, I feel like with some of this stuff, did you ever see the movie Back to School with Rodney Dangerfield?
Oh yeah, the Triple Lindy.
So if you remember Sam Kinison, he goes, like a farmer holds the dirt, sacred. That's what I think of some of this stuff. So I really do. So hopefully this comes out. So Scott Irwin is always one of these guys. And later on, I'll tell you a story that'll show you why I really liked him or what it meant to me. But so Thor the Viking shows up. I didn't know what his name was. He shows up in 79, and they had Eric the Red, who was a Viking character in Florida in 78. He was a monster heel. I'd seen a little bit of him, and then he disappeared. I didn't know why at the time, and tragically, he got hit by a vehicle after his car stalled and he passed away. Very sad. I don't know if that's why Irwin became a Viking, but either way, he showed up in Florida. And he had the hair. He looked just like Yukon Eric. It was Eric, right?
Yes.
In WWF, he was Eric?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So he looked like that. And he was pretty much not a lot of holds. I saw him win a couple of matches the first time I'd ever seen with the double stomp that Kevin Sullivan used to use, where he'd jump on the stomach. I'd never seen that. But he was seemed like a tough enough guy in the ring. At some point he tags with his brother. I didn't even realize that. As a kid, I just never made the connection. But he just, the way he carried himself, just very impressed me. A lot of action, a lot of stomping, kicking, whatever. But they put the Southern belt on him. He upset Terry Funk. Go figure that out. Now, I'd seen Terry Funk a little bit. I knew he had the pedigree of a former world champion. And this guy with long hair who's 6'4", comes in and upsets him. And he had a pretty good run for a while. Right. And this is in 79. And then we'll see toward the end of 79, Florida, the one thing about wrestling, and I realized this after watching it, you'd see some of the guys and they can only fit maybe, 5 matches and interviews on an hour, right? Sometimes it would be 6, but for the most part, it was 5 matches. So think about it. Maybe you'd have to throw together a tag team to get a couple of guys exposure or whatever, however they did it. And there would be the interviews for whatever town they were promoting. So if a guy just dropped off the radar for a while, there was no announcement saying so-and-so is no longer here. They just weren't there. That's how it ended. If a guy lost a lose or leave town match, they didn't often say, hey, so-and-so beat so-and-so and now this guy's gone. They just didn't do that. So after a while, Thor the Viking is in various tag matches and he's on the losing end on TV a bit. And you start to see that he's losing, but okay, you don't think anything of it. And then he disappears. Now, he never spoke. At one point he may have been aligned with Sonny King, but wasn't very long, but he did not speak. Why was that important? So around October, guy in a mask shows up, the Super Destroyer, using the pile driver. Seemed like a monster heel. And right off the bat, after he gets out of the ring, he goes to Gordon Solie and he says, is it 5? He had a challenge with money. Can't remember if it was 5 or 10,000, which, I'm sure it wasn't. And he said, anybody who kicks out of my pile driver, I'll give him the money and give him my mask. And then they put him in handicap matches on TV, and he's beating everybody with the pile driver. And no, I had no clue. I wasn't that smart. I was 10 years old. I did not know that they were the same.
Yeah, I would have never known the increment that you're referencing, but because of all the research I've been doing, it is a $5,000 challenge. Is the one you're referencing. Yeah, absolutely. And so we're going to get into that as we move into 1980 as well.
But what's fascinating, the one thing I'll throw out there, the gap of Thor leaving and the Super Destroyer arriving is not that long.
No, not at all.
And I don't know if other fans picked up on it, but I sure as didn't.
Well, that's telling because there are some certain guys who leave and come back, and you basically almost immediately can tell who it is. But for someone who's watching pretty much on the weekly and not to be able to realize it immediately, it tells me that they did something right with the gimmick, the character change or whatnot. So we will never get to talk anymore about Thor the Viking, unfortunately, in 1980, but we will get to talk about the Super Destroyer, which is also Scott Irwin, so we have that to look forward to.
Yes.
Now, we're going to get into some of the champions that are going to be coming into 1980, coming out of 79, and they happen to be on your list. But before we get to those champions, I wanted to make sure we hit on another guy who, unfortunately, didn't have a whole lot of titles, but he made a lot of titles. See what I did there? And I'm talking about Reggie Parks. Tell me a little bit about Reggie Parks, your memories of him in the ring. A lot of people go, the belt maker? Yes, he was a wrestler first, guys.
The belt maker was in fantastic shape. He had very well defined. He was very muscular. At this point, he would still win some on TV, vertical body block, before, like Tommy Rich's. Maybe not as snug as Tommy Rich's, but vertical body block, abdominal stretch. But he was on TV almost every week, and they would give him some wins, give or take, not many, but he would take on the heels. Something about him, I just always enjoyed watching him. And he could give a good match to anybody. He would get his share of offense in, even if he was putting the heels over. Never had an interview or anything, but he had been well-traveled at this point. I think he was in his mid-40s. But
he was getting up there,
as a young fan, he was somebody who I, even back then, enjoyed watching because it wasn't going to be a total squash. And it's just somebody who made an impact, and we'll talk more about him and some of the other guys in 1980. But he's somebody I always enjoyed watching. So that's why he was on my list.
No, absolutely. A lot of those guys are unsung heroes of their era, just being able to come out there and put on a solid match and fill out the cards. Even the preliminary matches, him to the Gordon Nelson, who, from my understanding,
we'll talk about him.
Ways. Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk about him later. But yes,
we'll talk about a lot of the great talent that come through Florida, but some of the talent that's right in your face would go on to become champions, and that would make sense. Main eventers, headliners, and we're going to talk about a couple of those guys right now. I'm going to let you take your pick who you want to start with here, but at the end of 1979, a couple of guys hold the Southern Heavyweight title. Now, for every Dusty Rhodes and Ernie Ladd, there's some names that are more regional, if you will, and a couple of these guys were Sweet Brown Sugar, a.k.a. Skip Young in some territories, and Bad Leroy Brown. Tell me your memories of those two guys, Sweet Brown Sugar and Leroy.
Sweet Brown Sugar, to me, at least from my perspective, no disrespect to Jim Brunzell or Coco Beware or any of the others, I thought Sweet Brown Sugar had the best drop kick of anybody I'd ever seen. I really did. He was Skip Young, not his given name, but Skip Young. And apparently I didn't know this because if I'd been watching day in, day out in 78 or 77, he was in Florida, Skip Young. So I have a hard time believing that if I had been watching back then, I wouldn't have gone, oh my God, that's Skip Young under a mask. But like the spoiler did in Georgia on him, which I never understood why. But either which way, phenomenal talent, great I'm going to sound like Gordon Soley, great definition and muscular or whatever, but he was in great shape. And when we get to 1981, I'll talk about the big screw up he did. I'll save that. But he was a phenomenal talent. He was Southern champion, which was, I think, his first championship. I never understood, you're going to laugh, when he would come out with the different masks he had. I don't know what kept them on his head, some of them, because I'm just saying they didn't look real snug. But just saying. But he was phenomenal. Bad Leroy Brown, another individual like Scott Irwin, who passed away way too young. By all accounts, smiled a lot. You could see it even in the interviews as a heel. Very smiley, very happy-go-lucky, very sad that he didn't live longer, but monster heel, at least in 79 and 80 in Florida. And he seemed like he's another guy who could do whatever he wanted in the ring in terms of beating somebody up. He had a long career. He traveled a lot, but definitely very talented guy. He was credited in an angle later that we'll talk about that he put Sweet Brown Sugar out of action, but that's an angle for another time.
Well, you talk about Leroy Brown. We're going to see him as the Southern Heavyweight Champion as we move into 1980, having dethroned Sweet Brown Sugar. So we'll have to wait and see who steps in the way. But Leroy Brown's going to be at the top of the card, so that's a big name to remember as we continue to move into the new year.
And you'll see that he becomes managed when he returns by Sir Oliver Humperdink, who is, for me, one of the best managers, especially in Florida.
Well, we might as well spend a minute here on Oliver right now, because for me, and don't get mad at me, because there's a but at the end of what I'm about to say. Okay. So just remember there's a but coming. Mid-Atlantic, Sir Oliver Humperdink, did not work for me. Mid-South Wrestling, Sir Oliver Humperdink, did not work for me. The World Wrestling Federation, Sir Oliver Humperdink, sure as hell. Well, that's WCW. That's like Big Daddy Dink. Good God.
You're right.
Okay, so the Big Kahuna, too. He managed the
Refresh my memory real quick. In Mid-Atlantic, who did he manage? What did he have?
Leroy Brown, for instance. He had Leroy. He had pretty much the heels. He was the manager in there at that point. But remember, there's a but. There's a but at the end of this. But I'll let you go on. Go on.
No, give me the but.
But I love his work in Florida. It's something about Oliver in Florida. It's like he was meant for, and I know he did some time with the Hollywood Blondes. I know he worked in L.A., so I know he did some other things, but that was before videotape really exists of his work. So,
I get it.
But his stuff in Florida, I really enjoy him. I like Oliver Humperdink in the Florida territory. It's so weird.
Yeah, no, I get that. And certain people didn't work other places, right? He was, for me in Florida, of the managers I saw, no disrespect to some of the other guys who came through. I didn't see Gary Hart, so I can't comment on Gary Hart, right? But if I go from Masao Tori, Sir Oliver Humperdink, Lord Alfred Hayes, we'll talk about Hayes.
Oh, my word.
He was a lot better than the promotional consideration paid for. Oh, God, don't get me started. As a heel manager in Florida, he was pretty good. J.J. Dillon, Percival Pringle, or whatever he was called down here. Maybe that's what he was. Gentleman Jim Holiday, for those of you who have an eye for detail, or Jim Kent. Humperdink was the best by far that I saw. There was something about him, the way he would communicate, where he could be like he had a plan, he was going to carry it out.
Yeah.
But if he needed to take the fall for something, he could. I don't know how to explain it other than the fact that he would amass the House of Humperdink. He would be surrounded by really vicious heels. He felt like he had a diabolical mind. And I thought he was, quite honestly, I thought he was fun to watch. And since you brought him up, he was one who unfortunately passed away before all the fan fests. I think I got to converse with him a little bit online, and just an amazing, seemed like a great guy. So
he seems like a guy that would have been at a lot of those fan fests as well, because he really liked to engage online. He was in the old kayfabe boards and places like that. He loved to talk about the business and the history, and
he did. And talk music. He was a big music guy too. So there are certain guys who, and when we get to them, I'll talk about that. And I hope it comes out that there are certain guys who are an absolute honor. And I remember going to the first fan fest and saying, I hope I don't mark out. And Barry saying, we're all probably going to mark out. Well, I did for a few of them, for a few people. But it's been an honor for the ones who, there are a few who pretty amazing. One of whom you've worked with.
Okay.
Very and good. You know who that is.
I think I have an idea.
You know.
I'd bring him on the show, but then he'd tell us how to build the watch instead of tell us the time, and we just don't have that kind of time right now. I love him anyway.
But got to spend a lot of time with him. My wife got to meet him, and just what an amazing guy. So
absolutely.
Anyway.
But anybody scratching their head, we're referencing Bob Roop is what we're doing there. But
with much love,
a little respect to Bob out there. I hope he's doing well. I just talked to Bob a week or two ago, so
good.
He's enjoying. He's just had another birthday recently. Another trip around the sun, as they say. Yep. Well, we talked about a lot of the top talent, but we were missing a name, and that's because, well, this is interesting because this is kind of his breakout time period. I feel like anyway. Just based on if you read his history in the Florida territory and wrestling in general here by this point, I'm talking about, we'll know him at some point as the Raging Bull, Manny Fernandez, a future world tag team champion with Rick Rude working for Crockett. But way back here, man, he was getting it done in Florida. I had got to meet Manny many years ago at an indie show back in the mid-1990s. I bought a headband that said Raging Bull from him, and And he was cordial enough, to be talking to a teenage me. But Manny Fernandez here, it's amazing to watch him slowly rise. I mean, from mid-card to upper tier to now Florida heavyweight champion is what he's going to be here moving into 1980. Now, Terry Funk comes in and defeats Steve Kernan in a tournament final in September 79 to become the new Florida heavyweight champion. But the Funker going to lose that belt to Manny Fernandez in the latter days of October. And Manny's going to hold that belt all the way into the new year in several months to come. Tell me about the rise of Manny Fernandez.
So it's so funny because I'm going to have a lot to talk about with this. So out of nowhere, Manny Fernandez shows up and he wins the Florida belt pretty quickly. He could speak Spanish, obviously, which in South Florida was a very big asset. But he was still, at that time, he was young. He was still very mobile. Besides the whatever you want to call it, the
flying burrito,
the flying cross body block. They call it flying burrito. They didn't call it that in Florida in 79 or 80. Drop kicks, the whole thing. He had a pretty lengthy run and a feud with Terry Funk. And it's funny you say that about him. So at one of the Grapplegons, I got to meet him. And we talked a little bit about Florida. And then I was sitting with him at dinner and probably spent 2 hours with him. And just I had a really good time. So I'm always grateful for these things. But he told me it was his first push. He was pretty much a rookie. And I said, they just brought you in? He goes, yeah. Eddie brought me in. And next thing you know, they put the strap on me. Just like that. And he was very over. I mean, he eventually gets, world championship shot. He's teaming with Dusty. He's at the top of the card. In some ways, for me, this is the highlight of his career. Because when I watched him in Crockett, I always got the feeling they didn't exactly know what to do with him. That's my take.
Yeah, well, he had the babyface run. He turned on Boogeyman, and, that'll get shown.
Everybody turned on Boogeyman.
Poor Boogie. Maybe it was Boogie that whole time. I mean,
maybe it was the elbow drop he threw that. Never mind. Sorry.
Yeah, well, it's okay. It's just hanging with the street people.
Yep.
But
very. To me, he went from there to. I said, you left Florida and you never came back, and he said he went to Amarillo, worked for Joe Blanchard, and had a great time there. He seemed very at peace with everything. Seemed happy enough, but if you watched him week in and week out, he was on TV a lot. He was doing his interviews bilingual, and he was very much over. The fans loved him. I liked him.
Well, just in the footage that exists of Manny very early on there, he could really move. You referenced it, but just see how the speed of which, the way he could deliver moves and bounce off those ropes, jump off those ropes, things Manny was able to do. I could see why he caught on like a quick wildfire, no pun intended. But
and obviously the Manny and Crockett probably had a different weight, right? I think you'd put some weight on.
Put a little weight on, yeah.
But we all do that as we get older, at least most of us do. But
I'll attest to that.
Me too. But it was his first run. I got to speak with him about it. Really, it was a pleasure meeting him and talking CWF with him. So.
Well, we got a lot of big stories for Manny coming in. He's another guy, like Leroy Brown. We're going to see him all around the top of the cards moving into 1980. Yep. There's a story I'm going to share that was shared to me by someone, and I'm going to have to ask him if I don't know if it's a story that's out there and it's common knowledge or not. I had never heard it before, but it involves Manny Fernandez in the ring with Nikolai Volkov. And I don't know if you've heard that story or not, but I talked to someone who was there in the arena at that event and worked in the office, and we're going to be referencing and singing a lot of praises to a lot of historians and super fans and office employees and things of that nature in future episodes that have already been very helpful and instrument, getting me all situated and with research and backstage information and all sorts of things as we continue to roll on here. But this particular episode is more just about Harold and Harold's memories and Harold's thoughts, because we're going to be talking to Harold a lot more about these guys as we move forward in these stories. We've got other people I'm sure will pop in from time to time as well. But right now, we're going to move from the singles ranks for a moment, because we got to go back. We're still at least a couple other singles guys I want to hit on for sure. But I want to look at the tag team scene for a moment. Mike Graham and Steve Kern were an on-again, off-again. They were kind of like the high flyers to me, man. They were the tag team of that era in that territory. Tried and true. You can depend on them to get in there, give you a good match, and likely come out the winners more often than not. But again, we talked about the Japanese teams of the time coming through here, but then there was another team that really an upstart tag team. Now, later on, one of them is going to become a legendary tag team wrestler multiple times over. And I'm talking about the Nature Boy, Stanley Lane, and Bryan St. John, who I don't really understand. I know he gets the knee injury later on here in 81, 82, whatever that was. And he kind of just goes away. And it's unfortunate because, me and Jamie got to cover that Georgia, and they don't let him talk often. But when he did, I was like, why doesn't this guy get more promo time? He's honestly pretty good, and he kind of found a character, and then he just goes away. But here, it's a upstart tag team, Stan Lane and Bryan St. John. They're going to win the tag titles multiple times here. But tell me about your memories of them. What were they?
So I got to ask one thing real quick. With Bryan St. John, did you talk about in Georgia how he shows up and he says, "I'm here to rub everybody's face in the mat who did it before to me"?
No, I don't remember covering that.
That's how he returned to Georgia. He returned to Georgia by himself, and it was going to be, "I'm going to rub everybody's face in the mat who did it to me when I was here before." And then he hurt his knee and sort of disappeared. But anyway, going back to
well, just quickly. See, I would have seen that promo, but the guy who recorded all of that, sometimes he would record over shit, and then we don't have that promo. Unfortunately, that was a great history.
You know what you do have? There's a match where he takes on a guy in an expiration of time, I think named Stanley, Dave Stanley, and Gordon references it during the match.
Okay, cool. Good to know.
I don't have that because I didn't edit it. I wasn't recording that part of the year. But he does reference it. So the tag team of Nature Boy, Stanley Lane, and people can't realize that it was another Nature Boy, and Bryan St. John. Very flashy, long blonde hair, great on the mic. They would use, it's interesting because great teamwork. St. John, I think it was, would use the bombs away, which was basically a knee drop off the top. And he was going to get into it with Ray Stevens. I don't think that went very far, but they did win the tag team belts. They also both used the atomic knee drop, and Lane used the side backbreaker, which he used for a lot of his career as a finisher. I thought they were great. I enjoyed watching them. Great on the mic. They didn't stay as long as I would have thought they would have. I remember them. They stuck out in my mind. But they won it at the end of 79, toward the end of 79, if I remember. They beat Ray Stevens during Stevens' last real run in Florida. He does appear for maybe one match to give up the Florida TV belt in 82 that I don't recall him ever winning, but okay. And I think that they're there maybe half the year of 80. But their teamwork, they were great. I thought they were going to stay together and go far for a long time. But after about 6 or 8 months, Lane ends up in Georgia in 1980, loosely aligned with Dennis Condrey. And I don't know where St. John went. St. John ends up in Georgia in like the beginning of 81,
81, right, yeah.
And then he hurts his knee and his ankle, if I remember. And he quits the business and becomes a paramedic in, I think it was in Arizona.
Okay. And I didn't know what happened to him. So that's interesting.
And so he's another guy who's on the list of AAs who people are always like wanting to get in touch with, but he has never made an appearance at any of these. So
yeah, he'd be a great kid.
I don't know.
There's one of those.
But I thought they would be. But some of these guys, when they walk from the business,
they don't want anything to do with it.
Anymore.
No, I've heard that. Just I don't even want to say a bad taste in their mouth. It's just a part of their life. They want to just move away from it, and they have that right. Anybody has that right to just kind of be done. And it's unfortunate for us fans, but we're selfish as fans. So
we are.
So we've got another title, kind of, sort of, sometimes anyway. And I'm talking about the television title. And that is currently held by Bugsy McGraw, who defeats Buzz Sawyer, one of your favorites, Buzz Sawyer in September 79. Bugsy McGraw going to hold that belt all the way into 1980 and for a while to come. So we won't spoil too much of what's ahead for Bugsy's career here in 1980, but set the stage and let everybody know a little bit about what Bugsy was doing moving into the new year.
And there wasn't a lot around the TV belt. The TV belt was kind of one of these when they needed something out there, but you didn't, it would disappear for a while. Then it would show up, then it would disappear. You know, it was like you had the Florida belt was the big one. You had the Southern belt, which represented, according to Gordon Soley, 9 states, and he would list the states, but it always felt, gee, the guy's not here. He must be in one of the other states, whatever. You had the Florida, the tag belts. You had the TV belt, which was in and out. And then you had briefly the junior heavyweight belt, which we'll talk about at some point. But, you know, I'll be honest, I think he cheated on TV. I don't remember. I think maybe he did one of the feet on the ropes thing. I don't know that it was a clean win. I don't recall him really defending the thing, to be honest. Now, Bugsy, we'll talk about in 1980, other championship runs. He has another one that is stuck in my head for whatever reason. But I don't recall him doing a lot with the TV championship. And back then, Bugsy seemed to be in and out of certain factions. At one point, it was with, I think, Sonny King briefly. He seemed to just appear, but it didn't feel like he had a lot of direction. Right. That was my take.
Well, they're going to have some kind of direction with Bugsy moving forward. I think Dusty's going to take a liking to what he can mold out of Bugsy McGraw here. They even say, in more recent years, unfortunately, he's already passed away now as well, but the Bray Wyatt character, his early stuff was based on Bugsy's delivery in promo, that Dusty would take Bray Wyatt, Mike Rotunda's son, into the TV room and have him watch old Bugsy McGraw promos from, the early Bugsy stuff and try to learn that cadence and that delivery. And so I guess a lot of that did come from Bugsy McGraw. Maybe not so much his world-class comedy stuff, but, or his
he wasn't doing the big comedy stuff. He was doing a scary, crazy heel back then is what he was doing.
We got a lot of changeover here, and that happens a lot in the territories. Guys go away, new guys come in. You talked about it. You briefly mentioned Bryan St. It looked like they were going to do something with him and Ray Stevens, and then they kind of just move into this Stan Lane, Bryan St. tag team, which works. It gets over. They're the tag team champions. Manny Fernandez shows up, and boop, already off to the races. He's got a title belt. So a lot of these guys, people are wondering as we start the new year, where were they before? What did they do before? A lot of these guys were just getting their feet wet in the Florida territory or as champions or with a big push. And so we kind of look at some of the things that were happening near the end of the year. And there's names we're not going to hit on this week, but we will cover them at the beginning of next episode before we really get rolling into 1980 with the next episode. But there's just so much to look at. We talked about the titles, the international junior title, which is going to pop up here briefly at the beginning of the year. Steve Kern will be involved in that mess. Yep. And Mike Graham's going to be hanging around as usual. We'll talk about Mike and his dislike of making the trips, especially to these smaller towns, from my understanding. So I've heard. I mean, allegedly, I don't know that to be fact. Other than 46 people have told me that. But
I'll be 47. It's only from what I heard.
Okay. Well, other names that come through here, the legendary names. Bobo Brazil is here on and off, and I had heard that Bobo was booked specifically because just out of respect. Obviously, he was getting older and far less mobile in the ring. Not that he had to do a whole lot to begin with, but with the Cocoa Butt. Even my grandfather, who did not watch wrestling, told me about Bobo Brazil and the Cocoa Butt. So that goes back. That goes way back. But Bobo comes through here. You remember watching Bobo as a kid?
I do. And I will say this. I liked Bobo. I enjoyed watching him. As a kid, he felt like he was older. He looked it. It didn't mean that I looked at him. I go, this guy looks like a tough guy anyway. He looked old. Cocoa Butt. So most of his moves, he didn't do a lot of power moves. It was mostly the headlock, the forearms, maybe a head scissors, maybe a chin lock, the infamous I do the scissor in the corner and kick him on the head and then hit him with a headbutt or cocoa butt, right? He had different, if I remember this very well, he had a quick attempt to get the Southern Championship from Dick Slater.
Okay.
And not only do I remember, here's one that probably no one will remember, or maybe one will. There was a big deal. It was on TV, and Dick Slater had said some bad things about Bubba Douglas, and we'll talk about Bubba. May he rest in peace. And Gordon Solie goes, Mr. Slater, the special referee is Bubba Douglas in Tampa. Good luck, sir. He didn't win the belt. I don't know what happened, but
right.
Bubba always found a way to be a part of different storylines, which was cool. They did put the Florida tag belt on him with Bugsy briefly, but he didn't really do much on TV with it, and I think he was pretty much gone by the end of 80, I think. But I do remember him very well and very, very vividly.
Well, there's going to be, for every Terry Funk, Dory Funk, R.I.P., by the way, to Dory Funk recently passing away.
Yes, we need to talk about that.
We're gonna see a lot of these guys come through here. And Dusty, don't worry, even though I only briefly mentioned him as winning the world title for that 5-day run in 79, Big Dust ain't going nowhere. He will be all over the place here in 1980. We'll be talking about Dusty Rhodes and the things he gets involved in as we get rolling here. But I wanted to spend a little time talking about some of the other talent that are departing at the time and new talent heading in. We're going to see Johnny Valiant for a very brief hiccup. I've heard people tell me I didn't even, and people that worked for the company at the time, mind you, said, I don't even remember him being there.
Yeah, he was there about 3 weeks. He had about 3 TV matches, maybe a couple. So what I'll tell you about Johnny Valiant is he came in, he used a neck breaker. That was his finisher. His matches were, the 2 matches, I think I saw 2 of them. They were quick.
Thankfully.
They maybe a body slam, some WWF style, hate to say it, punches or forearms, fell among the punches, maybe the elbow on the top of the head, maybe a slam and a neck breaker. I don't think his style was going to get over here. And I think that's why he didn't last. That's my guess. We talked about Reggie Parks, right? We'll talk, believe me, we will talk about Gordon Nelson with the utmost respect. These guys could work. I don't want to say Johnny Valiant couldn't work. That would be disrespectful. But the style, that WWF punch and kick style, was not going to get over in Florida.
Right.
Just wasn't.
Well, you were a big fan of the preliminary guys, and I was too as a kid. Like there were certain guys, whether even in the tape trading era, as I first started learning of more of the work from Johnny Rods and guys like that. If you saw certain guys in the ring, it's like, oh, this is going to be a good prelim. Now, Florida had more of those than, say, the WWF, but I'm just using that for an example because we're going to get into Don Serrano, who is one of my favorites. Gordon Nelson is going to be here. Very young Terry Taylor is going to come through here. Ron Slinker will be here. Luis Sastilla is on the undercard here. I see a lot of names that we're going to be jumping into.
You want me to keep going? Frank Monty, Jeff Ports, who is Scott McGee's father.
Yes.
A personal friend who I will talk about with great reverence, Ted Marshall, who became T-Terror, Bill White, who became the Scorpion, a lot of guys like that. You will probably get a lot out of me on those because they were really good to me from my perspective.
Very cool. Yeah, I'm just looking at some of the names we're going to be hitting on in the upcoming weeks, so people have an idea of not just the names we've already discussed, but Nikolai Volkov basically going to appear here by the beginning of the year. We'll be talking about Big Nick. We'll be talking about Don Diamond, who is an interesting character, comes in.
He's another one who went MIA, and I will be able to provide a little bit for that.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, he's another one that I was, whatever happened to Don, just right in the middle.
I know what happened to him.
Okay. Mike Miller, who's going to have a lot more success in Portland later on.
Yeah.
So just lots of names we're going to be jumping into, guys. The Briscoes, of course, how could I forget to mention Jack and even more specifically Jerry Briscoe here. Man, Alfred Hayes, you talked about it. We've got just tons of talent we're going to continue to discuss. We'll talk about all the big gimmick matches, the angles, the TV. We've got some attendance figures. It's gonna be a blast jumping into 1980, and I'm going to.
And if I don't mention another one of my favorites, I'll regret it. Hangman Bobby Jaggers. I may be one of the few, but but I enjoyed watching him. So
he's been fun. Me and Jamie have been covering him on Southwest USA, and we are almost to the unmasking of El Santo Negro. So as soon as I get there, you know what's happening, Harold, and we'll just leave that between me and you. Absolutely. But now I got to thank some names here as we get to close up shop this week. Bruce Tharp, I want to thank him for reaching out and sending me pages of information. For those of you who don't know, Bruce worked in the offices. He had some behind the scenes knowledge of a lot of the talent, a lot of things going on. So Bruce,
and let me just say one thing, a shout out to Bruce. I got to meet him at one of the fan fests, and I got to tell him he was my all-time favorite ring announcer. He was going to law school at the time, but I always enjoyed. He is a phenomenal guy. So Bruce, all the respect to you. Thank you.
Bobby V. Van Kevlar. Did I ruin your name, Bobby? I want to thank him. He saw me post one of the recent mentions of the research. He said, "Hey man, can I help you out?" I said, "Whatever you got." And he has a lot, as we know, Harold, and so he sent me a lot of information here on 1980. I want to thank Bob. Please continue to send the information, Bobby. It's very useful knowledge for the story we're going to be telling. I've got the first quarter, I think, of the year really well researched, and then just some of the basics from that point forward. But we continue on. Howard Baum, I haven't heard from you in a while, Howard, but I know you live. I know you live this too, and you're a big super fan of wrestling. But it's certainly the Florida territory. I'm sure we're going to be talking more with Howard and Barry Rose, who I've not touched base with. But Barry, I can't go on a Florida project, even though Barry hasn't been specifically involved because he's got a lot of crap going on in Barry's world right now. But I have to think that a little bit of Barry is rubbed off on all of these names, and certainly the Florida wrestling history that's out there. I have to think that even though we don't know, I'm sure a lot of the credit can still go back to Barry in some way, shape, or form for keeping it alive all these decades. So I wanted to mention Barry here at the end of the program as well.
One of the all-time great people, and I consider a personal friend, and just a phenomenal. Much love to him.
So those are some of the names, and I'm sure more will pop up. And if I forgot anybody, I apologize. I've got like 18,000 things going on, but hit me up. I'm sure you will. So, Harold, I got to thank, more than anybody, I got to thank you, man. You're the one that came to me and said, I want to do this. And we kind of figured out a year to start with, and looking forward to the Florida 1980 project ahead with you, man.
Thank you. And I just want to honor all the people who you mentioned, and I want my passion for what was a very special time and a special territory. I hope it comes through, and looking forward to it. Thank you so much for including me.
Absolutely, man. Looking forward to it as well, guys. Stay tuned. We've got plenty more from the Championship Wrestling for Florida. The CWF project of 1980 is on the horizon. It's right around the corner, right here, part of Regional Rasslin, where we talk the territories. Thanks again, Harold.
Thank you.